together. And you said, first of all, that there's a malevolent factor. I mean, bad things happen to people that are involved here, and there is this connection with the occult that is very consistent across the board. You even called it, Ken, a prerequisite almost to people who have rUFO experiences. Well, this suggests an interdimensional factor that you raised in past sessions, Dr.
Well,
Ross.
let me throw out another factor before we move on to that, and that is there's a lot of non-random characteristics to these residual UFOs. The fact that they prefer 3 a.m. in the morning to other times of the day, lonely roads as opposed to heavily populated areas. The fact that the science that they communicate seems to be just slightly ahead of that of the layman. I mean, their facts about our solar system and our galaxy and our universe seem to be incorrect.
In other words, what they communicate to people when they're allegedly talking to people,
right?
They're not as smart as you'd think they should be.
Well, I mean, their science is not up to the level of graduate school astronomy and physics, but it is right about the level of high school or undergraduate level science and astronomy, but it keeps getting better and better as we learn more and more.
So the rank and file would be impressed by this, so you realize that they're really not that technologically advanced in the information they're giving.
Right. I mean, we're getting into this interdimensional thing that
they're suspicious.
It's suspicious that they don't know as much about the universe as we already know. Moreover, their knowledge seems to be advancing at the same pace that our knowledge is advancing. And even the UFO phenomena, I mean, it started off 100 years ago being slow-moving dirigibles, then fast-moving craft moving as fast as the speed of sound. Now they're going at 15,000 miles per hour. So the fact that it's keeping pace with our technology and keeping pace with our level of science knowledge, but never accurate, makes me suspicious about what their real motive is. I mean, I think it gives some additional evidence for what Ken is saying. There's really a deception going on, because they seem to tailor their message to the audience that's receiving it.
Dr. Ross, I'm a little confused on the connection. I understand that you say their technology here is behind the times where it ought to be if they're ETs. This is suspicious. Can you give us some more illustrations and show the real significance of that to your view?
Yeah, sure can. Remember we were talking about 100 years ago, these spaceships were dirigibles. Well, the beings on board, so-called beings, were claiming to be visitors from the moon. And then when human society reached a point where they recognized the moon is not a possible location for ET.
It's not made of green cheese.
It's not made of green cheese. And they said, well, we're from Venus. And then when they discovered that the temperatures on the surface of Venus are 800 degrees, then their story became, well, we're from Mars. And when that was no longer credible, well, we're from the moons of Jupiter and Saturn.
And this is following right along our technological understanding.
Right. Now they're saying they're from some distant star system because we've been able to rule out the solar system as a possible location for ET. So the fact that they're connecting with the level of our human education, technology, and understanding gives support for the idea that they're really intent on deceiving us. And they try to connect with the people at that time. I mean, if they're really technologically advanced creatures, you would expect their science knowledge to be accurate. The fact that it's always just a little bit ahead of the average layperson makes us suspicious that they've got another motive in mind, namely to connect with the audience and to deceive them.
So it's starting to sound like a con job a little bit here as you're looking more and more at the details.
Well, when you look at the abduction experience where a person is taken against their will on a craft, and typically scientific experiments are done on the medical procedures. Greg, they're very crude in nature. They don't seem to operate as if they're an advanced civilization, a noble civilization. Their scientific, so-called scientific messages don't jive with good science. So again, a deceptive nature seems to be prevalent.
Well, this brings us at an important juncture in our conversation, because given the three theories here, we've really amassed a tremendous amount of persuasive evidence that the first two theories are not adequate to account for rUFOs. That brings us to the threshold of a third theory that you propose to explain rUFOs, and that is the extra-dimensional hypothesis. What do you see as being the main strengths of this theory? Can you give us the strengths after you describe specifically what it is?
Well, the strengths are that there is this mountain of evidence that the cause is non-physical, and yet it's real. There are physical effects. and therefore it seems to speak of some kind of entity that's not confined or restrained by the 10 space-time dimensions of the universe. They have the capacity to invade our space-time dimensions, but they're not limited by our space-time dimensions. So in that sense, they're extra-dimensional entities. And that, of course, leads to the whole idea, do we have any physical evidence that that is even a realistic possibility? And this is where the astrophysics of the past 30 years, I think, is significant in challenging this naturalist paradigm that everything that is real is physical. You can appeal to the space-time theorems of general relativity, which simply state that if the theory of general relativity is a correct explanation of the dynamics of the universe, then the cause of the universe must bring the entire universe into existence, independent of matter, energy, and all the space-time dimensions associated with matter and energy.
Well, let's pause there for a moment, because this is a very important point you're making, and I just want to revisit it just a little bit. Basically, what you're saying is that science itself demonstrates that there's something outside of science. That is, something outside of nature.
There's something beyond physical reality. Something beyond nature.
Because some people are going to say, well, how can science discover the non-physical world? Science wasn't meant to do that. And you're saying even the foundational theorems of general relativity demonstrate that nature came from somewhere that wasn't nature.
Correct.
And so just in that, we've got a very strong indication that something is outside of science. And this hypothesis draws upon that scientific understanding that there's more here than meets the eye in the naturalistic world.
And see, the skeptic is now forced into denying the theory of general relativity. And what's interesting about the past 2 years of physics research is that general relativity has now become the best proven, most exhaustively tested principle in all of physics. So given that we're forced to accept the reality of general relativity, we're also forced to accept the fact that the cause of the universe is a transcendent entity or a transcendent being.
Well,
therefore, non-physical reality must exist.
Right, right. So I mean, this is a tremendous statement that you're making here when you think about it, because up until now, a lot of people have simply thought that science, by its very nature, has limited our knowledge to the physical realm. And what you're saying is, in the case of UFOs, that knowledge of the physical realm disqualifies a fully physical explanation of the rUFOs.
Well,
and in fact, the science necessarily pushes us beyond that. We have scientific justification now for reaching into this extra-dimensional world for an explanation.
Well, science studies the universe, which is really the physical effect, but knowledge of the physical effect implies something about the cause of the physical effect. And we can now demonstrate that that causal agent transcends the physical realm. And earlier in this series, we talked about the anthropic principle. And when you really get down to the nuts and bolts of the anthropic principle, the fine-tuning is so extreme that it cannot be attributed to any physical entity within the universe. It's too great. It speaks about a being more powerful than the universe itself to explain that in a huge level of design. And so the space-time theorems of general relativity, combined with this anthropic principle, the evidence that the universe has been exquisitely designed to make human life possible in this narrow window of time, both speak of the reality of something beyond the physics of the universe. Now, I think what makes us helpful in trying to identify residual UFOs, it also establishes that of all the philosophical and theological works over the past several thousand years that deal with non-physical reality, the only message from that great body of works that's consistent with these new discoveries in physics and astronomy are the pages of the Bible. So what this does is it gives us some confidence of what the Bible says about non-physical reality compared to other religious holy books is reliable. Therefore, should we trust what the Quran's got to say or the Hindu Vedas? Well, no, because their statements about non-physical reality are contradicted by what the scientists are discovering. But what these scientists have discovered tells us that the Bible was ahead of the time by thousands of years. in describing these characteristics of the universe. Therefore, its message can be trusted
Right.
when it speaks of non-physical reality.
So what you're saying is science has justified the claim now that there is a reality outside of nature.
Right.
Indirectly has demonstrated that, as you pointed out. We have to take that seriously. And then that allows us to go, in a sense, outside of science to find some other kinds of explanations for these phenomena. The Holy Book